All right, awesome. 3, 2, 1. Welcome, Dr. Robyn. Thanks for joining us. We'd love to, just hear a little bit more about you and what you're doing to help parents and students.
Sure. Hi, thank you so much for having me. So I'm Dr. Robyn Koslowitz. I am the clinical director, the educational director of the Targeted Parenting Institute. What we do at Targeted Parenting is we train parents to understand their kids' unique neuro profiles, to understand their personality, to understand their emotions, to understand how their brains work. A lot of parents, when they think about their parenting, they think about parenting, so to speak, the neurotypical child, whether that's how they were parented, or even what they see if you watch like any TV show, you read any book, you kind of hear about like good parenting practices that work for the average neurotypical child. But as soon as you have a child who is a little bit out of the norm, a child whose brain is grappling with a challenge that other kids' brains don't have, all of a sudden we need some very specialized skills. So targeted parenting was born out of me spending a lot of time in psychotherapy explaining the same information to parent after parent after parent, one-on-one, and thinking, wait a minute, why don't I get all these people into a group, teach them all this information so they get it, and then when we're in therapy, the parents understand so much more. And what I found when I did that was a lot of parents never needed therapy after that. Like that was enough. Just learning their kid's brain, learning effective parenting, learning how to effectively parent an anxious child, which is very different than effectively parenting an impulsive child. That was enough, and we never actually needed to go to the actual psychotherapy. And with some kids, we did need to go into psychotherapy, but then psychotherapy was shorter because me and the parent were on the same page. The parent sort of had a mini child psychologist in their back pocket that they could pull out, and they would understand, and then we would just work on the specific things we needed to work on with the kid. So that's really where targeted parenting comes in, and my passion for educating parents. Recently, I started a new class on post-traumatic parenting because I discovered that a lot of parents have a lot of self-doubt about parenting because of things they went through in their own childhood, whether their parents were divorced or whether they lost a parent, or even they were bullied as a kid, or they were very shy as a kid, and they feel like, I didn't have a regular childhood. How am I going to give my children a regular childhood? So I started post-traumatic parenting as a course for those parents. Initially, it was only for parents who had lost a parent in childhood, but then it expanded to anyone who had some sort of a trauma in childhood, and now they're doubting their own instincts as a parent. And it's been like surprisingly extremely popular. You'd be surprised at the people who seem to have it all together, and they have this like what looks like a great family life and a great, great kids, great everything, great job, and then they have this parental self-doubt syndrome because of what they went through. Like, how do I know what's normal? How do I know if it's a thing or not, right, with my kids?
Sure.
So that's been like an extremely rewarding class to teach and to share with people. So that's pretty much what we do here.
This is exact same words I used with my wife last night. We were doing something very simple. She was using a water pick for teeth brushing, Mm-hmm. I said, how do you know how to do this stuff? And there's just a whole series of things that just come so, like, it's almost like innate to her. I grew up with a single mom. Dad left when I was 3. And this exact thing that you're talking about kind of happens almost on a regular basis. And it seems to me like there are the times that I feel most successful are the times that I'm not really listening to that inner dialogue, I guess, as
right.
Dr. Phil says.
That voice, right.
How do you explain this really heady stuff to parents so that they understand it and can walk away with it and kind of tap back into it?
So I think, first of all, it's demystifying it, right, with parents, understanding that it's okay, that parental self-doubt syndrome is very normal, and that when you've had an atypical childhood, it's even more normal, and that it's totally fine. And the first thing you have to do is accept that, yes, there were things about my childhood that I really wish wouldn't have happened, and I really wish I could go back into the past and like redo my childhood, in a much more typical fashion or in a much more healthy fashion, but I didn't have that, but I can learn, right? And whatever it was that I didn't have from my parents, I can still provide to my children, as long as I'm mindful about wanting to provide that to my children and understanding that there's a recipe, right? There's a way. I always say to parents when they start, sometimes parents are, suggested to come to a parenting class by their school. I consult in a lot of schools, and sometimes they're a little offended. Like, I have to take a parenting class, like what? And I always say to the school, it's kind of like this idea, like if I go to like, I don't know, a potluck and someone bakes a really good cake and I go in and I taste her cake and I start like teasing it apart and pulling apart the crumbs and thinking like, did she put in nutmeg? Is that cocoa powder? And like, I can sit there and I can do that. And I might even figure it out. Or I can like call the lady with the recipe and be like, hey, you made a great cake. How'd you do that? Right? And that's kind of like a parenting class. Like there are recipes for these things. Like there are ways to like get better from anxiety. There are ways to get better from impulse control problems. Like just call the lady with the recipe. So when we have a kid who's going through something and we ourselves weren't parented well about that issue, right? So just today I was talking to a mom who has very poor executive functioning. She never was taught to be organized, and her daughter's having the same problem. She's feeling very threatened when the school said that her daughter needs help with executive functioning. And I use this analogy. So call the lady with the recipe. You're saying that you don't have good executive functioning. You feel a lot of shame about it. And now when the school called you, you were feeling all this shame of like, I'm such a mess and my house is so disorganized. I'm like, oh my goodness. And like, I'm a bad mother. Let's tap into that feeling and not give that to your daughter. So the school is saying they have an executive functioning specialist who can teach your daughter organizational skills. Wow, yay. Instead of looking at it as a shameful, I don't know how to teach this to my daughter, maybe let's teach her. And maybe, there's people who teach grown-ups executive functioning skills too. Maybe, you can learn those lessons alongside your daughter. Let's take the shame out of it. Nobody taught you. It's not your fault, but it is your problem, right? It's not your fault. You're right. You were raised by a mom who never taught you executive functioning. Your mom was disorganized for whatever reason that was going on. She did the best she could with the tools she had. She didn't have great tools about this. So you don't have those tools. So let's give them to you. There's no shame. Like, I don't feel ashamed that I don't know how to, get a basketball into a basket. I am sure if somebody coached me and taught me, I could learn the skill. I don't value it enough to try, but if I wanted to, I bet I could learn, right? It's not shameful. It's just a skill I don't have.
No, but we tend to get locked up as adults in that, especially in our careers, is that, we need to we can't, once we hit, that point in our career, we need to constantly be the expert on it and not continue to be a learner. And that lifelong learner aspect, trait is something that needs to be there. Or again, like you just said, you get locked up, by your past and can't move forward.
Although I feel like my entire expertise with kids is getting curious and asking why, right? That's like I had this actually today in a school. I wasn't supposed to be doing this. I was there to observe a different student. She was absent and a kid was in the hallway and was being disruptive. And the principal said, like, you know what, you're here anyway. We have permission from her parents. Can you talk to her? And in 2 minutes, she and I were having a whole conversation about what's been going on in her classroom. And the principal was like, how'd you do that? And all I did was, she said, I can't be in my classroom today. And I said, okay, why? That's my entire expertise is being curious, right? My entire expertise is asking questions. It took me a long time to learn that. I remember as a graduate student not knowing how to do things and feeling like very like pressure to like hide the fact that I didn't know. And like, I remember like opening up like, different like statistics programs for dummies so that I could learn it, so that like someone would give me a job and they'd be like, okay, I need you to run these analyses for me by tomorrow. And I was like, I don't know how to run these analyses. And I didn't know how to ask. So I would just like buy like, I don't know, Manova for dummies and like teach it to myself in 6 hours. And then like after a while I learned like, wait a minute, just be like, I actually never ran this computer program. Can someone teach me how? Like, and then,
you bring up is because there's so much information out there that we feel like we know enough to be dangerous, as they say. But when you talk about parental self-doubt, for example, that's a trigger to keep us awake at night, right? It's one of those things that just kind of keeps our mind spiraling. And I think one of the things that I've been personally working on, everything's personal, right? For parents. Right, sure. So like sleeping, right? So you start to read about sleep and how to do a better job of it, and then you're kind of running around looking for the sleep guru. But I go back to like, what was his name? Dr. Wayne Dyer. He used to talk about if your mind is, if you're either past thinking, which is more guilt oriented, future thinking, which is more worry oriented, or present minded. And so everything talks about being present minded, and sleep is that kind of piece that gets caught in the middle of all that thought. And is it true that the child kind of latches on to our own sense of parental self-doubt, and those same triggers keep them awake as well?
Definitely. I think that also we have to remember with sleep, sleep is one of those things, I call it a feeder decision when we make decisions about prioritizing sleep, because if we have enough sleep, we have the foundation for like literally everything else. Self-regulation gets a lot better. Our ability to like stay in that more cold state where our emotions are not activated and we can think things through, our willpower, I mean, everything ultimately, all that stuff depends on how much sleep we get. We as parents, so there's two things with parental self-doubt. First of all, we as parents have to know that there are certain unshakable principles, right? There's like a quote that like the one true answer in parenting is it depends, right? And that's usually true with most questions that parents have. It depends on a lot of things, but there are some like basics, right, about care and feeding of children and of care and feeding of adults and basically care and feeding of humans. And one of them is we need sleep. We are biological creatures. We need sleep, we need food, we need water, right? Like those are immutable principles, right? If we don't have the bottom two tiers in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we can't push through. If we don't feel safe, we don't feel secure, right? That second tier of Maslow's hierarchy. And if we don't have sleep, food, hydration, right, warmth, right, all of those kinds of things, then those are the immutable principles, right? Those are not, it depends. You always need your sleep, right? You always need to be eating. You always need to be drinking. Like those are things that like we can't do without, right? We can talk about what to do if in an emergency situation they don't happen, but those are the hard and fast rules. Sleep nowadays is a serious problem, and there's actually a lot of research now about, like, every so often a research paper will pop into like one of the journals that I'm following about, is ADHD really a sleep disorder? Is autism really a sleep disorder, right? Are certain phobias really sleep disorders, right? Because there is a very strong connection between sleep and our brain's ability to press the reset button on a lot of the things that we look at, like, okay, we're gonna fix the ADHD, and we don't look at those feeder decisions that make it worse, right? We don't look at those things. Sleep in particular is one of them. And for us as parents, sometimes we have a hard time sleeping because of our own anxiety, and we can talk about that in a minute. And then one of those things that our kids sometimes actively resist, that we know that we have to feel very strongly about, and we have to communicate to our kids, this is an essential, it's a non-negotiable. Sleep's gonna happen, right? Like smartphones are not going in our bedrooms, no matter what. Like there are certain things that are gonna be like, I don't care what, just like, no, you can't drink that gigantic bottle labeled drain cleaner, right? No, it's hard and fast. No, we're very comfortable saying that, right? Yes, you are going to take your medication, right? You're going to take your antibiotics exactly as the doctor ordered. Like, we're not playing a game with that. In the same way, we're not going to play a game with sleep. It's not a negotiation. It's not like, well, I think that video game's a little on the violent side, but your dad disagrees, and like, we'll have, I'll be fuzzy about it, right? This is like, no, sleep's happening. Like, this is a non-negotiable. So if you're talking about like those fast rules for parenting, that's one of them. Like sleep has to happen.
It's not a trend, like, so like you said, hydrating, where
Right.
there was this whole thing of how much, carrying your water bottle around and drinking a certain amount. It feels like everything's kind of tied to, if there's a marketing strategy, then it becomes something that's like some kind of trend. And sleep, like you said, is a foundational need. So how do we get our grips around, I know there's charts out there about like how many hours kids need based on their ages and so on and so forth. Is that something that you recommend, if that's a struggle for the family, that you recommend observing and tracking?
Definitely, I'm into data, so I like tracking things. So I'm very into like tracking our sleep, noticing that when we sleep more, we have better days and things like that. But even more so, I think we have to track what we do in the evening that sets us up for sleep, and that is like sleep, like sort of like sets our brains up to not be able to fall asleep, right? Because I feel like we get a lot more information about that. Like if supper's a little later, if practice runs over time, if we're stressed out, if we don't give the kids enough like winding down time, like, oh wow, that really has an effect on our sleep. Wow, I never noticed that. So that you can sort of like say, oh, that's the origin of that problem. Okay, so we have to think of another way of handling it, because clearly we're not winding down fast enough. to get that good night's sleep, right? We're not getting our brains ready. I think parents have to understand that brains have to be primed for sleep, and priming a brain for sleep starts almost like the morning before. Like if I want to prime my kid's brain to fall asleep at their bedtime or like very close to their bedtime that night, then how am I structuring the morning to set it up so that it happens? There's a lot. See, the thing is, some people naturally are very rhythmic and they have great circadian rhythms and they can fall asleep easily. And when they're tired, they sleep and it's natural for them. And those people, it's great. But some people are just the opposite. Some kids have very hungry brains and their brains are actively resisting being shut down, right? And there's a lot of reasons what the brain is hungry for we can talk about. But when you have that kind of brain, we have to plan for tonight's sleep early today's morning, right? Like otherwise sleep that night is not going to happen. We have to structure the day for sleep. And if we structure the day for sleep and we target sleep strongly, then all the other things that we're targeting become that much easier. Like I said, that's the feeder decision that makes all the other decisions much more possible.
Can you walk us through, because sleep in our house is a roller coaster ride, as probably with anybody's. But can you kind of walk us through or give us a few like takeaways on what we could implement with that? It's, I know there's a lot around the whole screen time and, when to start to shut that off and there's even glasses that, people wear that reduce their screen time effects. Can you talk a little bit to like, just some tips?
Sure. So I start in the morning. This is going to sound very like counterintuitive, but getting up a little earlier, opening up the shades in the room so that the room is as flooded with sunlight as possible. And if you live in a place where that's not possible certain times of year, there are those sunlight alarm clocks that actually mimic the sun. And they've actually done, I've shown this to kids. There's actually a video on YouTube where they convinced the rooster it was the morning in the middle of the night and the rooster started to crow, which means it really is mimicking the sun, right? Like it worked. So the idea is, what those alarm clocks do is they brighten gradually, just like the sun would. So if you have a room, like one of my kids, the room just doesn't get a lot of sunlight in the morning, even though, we live in a house where most of the rooms do, but that room doesn't. So we use that alarm clock just so that by the time their brain wakes up, it's waking up to light and it's resetting the circadian rhythm that this is, the light is coming in, it's the morning time, it's alertness time, it's time for like that dopamine to start being released, it's time for us to start our morning routine. I'm very into scents and pairing the day, not because I'm into aromatherapy, because I'm not, but because our brains are creatures of habit and our brains are very easily trained into things. Just like I have this thing where like when I go to a neighborhood that I grew up in, when I travel back, I grew up in Brooklyn. When I travel back to Brooklyn, I drive down a certain street, I get hungry for black and white cookies because there was I don't even like cookies anymore, but there was a bakery on that block that had the best black and white cookies. My father used to buy them for me all the time. So like I drive down that street, I want a black and white cookie, right? We can train our brains. Our brains are such creatures of habit, right? Basically what our brains do is they notice patterns, right? So if you have a certain wake-up scent that you spray in the room 10 minutes before you want to wake the kid up, the brain starts associating bright light, wake-up scent, alertness time. It says, oh, you want me to secrete all these, chemicals? You want me to secrete some dopamine? You want me to secrete a little bit of adrenaline just to like get the morning started? Great, I will do that for you. Almost like think of like as though there's a little short order cook in the back of the brain, and we want to send him the right order. So if we're watching a scary movie at like 9 o'clock at night, we're basically sending that short order cook a nice order for some adrenaline and some dopamine and like, and also alertness chemicals. And like if what you want is serotonin and oxytocin and all the calming chemicals, then don't order adrenaline and dopamine, right? So in the morning, we want to order up those things. So having like a wake up scent, I like to use a citrus scent because there's some research that it increases alertness. So we'll spray a scent, we'll have the lights get gradually brighter, we'll make it be a noisy musical, like let's get up, it's like a happy, fun environment, it's time to get up. If I can, I like to have kids do 20 minutes of cardio exercise in the morning to really wake their brain up to send the circadian rhythm. I'm just going to close the door 1 second. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Business does go on.
Oh, yeah. So I like to, again, we're sending the circadian rhythm the message that if I'm super alert, my heart's pumping at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, that means that 10 hours later, it's time to start like lowering, right, and calming me down. So we have to give that almost not the short order cook, but almost like the chef, that message of like, send me the calming chemicals 10 hours later. So if I can get kids dancing, doing exercise, getting their heart rate up, doing some jumping jacks, anything to increase alertness in the sunlight if I can, or like I said, in a brightly lit room if I can, sends that alertness message so that at night it's like, okay, now it's the cooling down time. I agree with you about the screens and about, about having kids, about not having kids, on their phones or watching things or anything too close to bedtime because of the blue light, but also because it's stimulating, it's engaging, it makes your brain pay attention. And we're trying to send the message to our brain, like, thinking time is over, analyzing time is over. Now is just like calming, soothing, being present, being calm time. It's not thinking time anymore. Yep. So sometimes it's true, kids can get hypnotized by something they're watching, but it also can like wake their brain up in a way that you really don't want them to be, right? Like, you don't want that at bedtime. I find like my kids at bedtime, sometimes they turn into like thirsty philosophers who want to like tell me everything that happened in school and ponder the meaning of life, And it's just like, but mommy, why are people mean sometimes? Like, it's 9:30, your bedtime is 7:30. We're like, this is a great conversation that we're not going to have right now, right? Like, we don't want their brain, but what happened? Something sparked their brain thinking that. That's why I like reading, like, instead of reading a new story every night at bedtime, I like reading the same few stories over and over again. Because again, it's like a soothing thing where we read that story, so it's hypnotic, it feels good, but it's not novel information, right? It's just like a soothing story that we've heard before a million times, right? So that we know it, and it's just like enjoyable to hear, but it's not like, oh, but wait, why did Goldilocks go into the bear's house if they've never heard that story before? Like, that's not the time to start sparking conversation. That's like a 2 o'clock in the afternoon conversation.
Yeah.
9:30 at night conversation.
I never would have thought of it that way, but that's a great idea, is to go back to those books that they know so that you're not sparking their interest. Because, we have the same philosophical conversations or discussing, we're into baseball now in my house. So it's discussing everything and anything in baseball at 9 o'clock at night while we're lying in bed. It's like, to shut their brains down, you're going to have to give them those things.
I've definitely made mental notes. Like I've said to my kids, like, I'm remembering your question because I want to talk. I have this thing, I do schmoozing walks with my kids. That's what we call them, where we go on a walk and we schmooze about their day. That's the exciting, like, daily, whatever. And like, I'll always say, okay, we're going to save that for our walk tomorrow. That's a great topic. Let's talk about that tomorrow. But you have to be trustworthy. So I have to like make a note of it, even if I like send myself a text to remind myself, like, we're going to talk about it. And then sometimes I'll be like, oh, I'm over that already, Mom, forget it. Like, that's not the conversation, which very often happens, but I need to be trustworthy to remember to bring the topic back up again. Otherwise, their brain is going to keep, the idea is also, especially when we're dealing with anxious kids who have a lot of fears at bedtime, I like to think about that concept of the Zeigarnik effect, which if you know anybody in marketing or advertising, it's things people talk about. It's that effect where when your brain still has a task to complete, it keeps a loop open in your brain, right? So that's how like a TV show will hook you season to season, right? They'll leave the main character in peril. So it's like, tune in season 4 and find out whether or not he or she died, right? Of course, you're going to tune back in because the loop is open. Oh my gosh, she's like hanging off the edge of a cliff. I want to know what's going to happen next, right? So that's an open loop, right? And that keeps us hooked on things. A closed loop is when we're done, we have all the information we need, and like, we don't have to, think about it anymore. So our brain shuts it down. With anxiety, we want to close loops a lot, but not at bedtime. But so when a kid is thinking about all these things, robbers, kidnappers, ghosts, monsters, coronavirus, right? Whatever it is that is on their head during the day, that's a really good time to have that conversation and fully answer their questions. People always think like when a kid is anxious, oh, but if I talk to her about it, she'll be more anxious. No, if you're anxious about robbers, let's talk about how robbers think. Let's talk about some basics of self-defense. Let's talk about basic smart safety precautions that everybody needs to know. Let's, visit the police station and, ask some questions, of like the sheriff's officer who's going to give us information. Like, you're scared of fires. We're going to go talk to a fire marshal and find out what our family needs to do to be prepared for fires. Then we can close the loop. Then at bedtime, it's like, but remember, you have all this information, right? You know. And when the kid goes down the what if, but remember, you know, you have that information. We had this conversation already. We have a fire ladder in our house. We know we have our emergency procedures in our house. We know what to do because the loop is closed already. So now they're not coming up with new questions, because if they're coming up with new questions, it's like, but remember, we have our procedures in place. We know what to do. We can close our loop now. Now is the time to tell Mr. Worry, thank you for the information. You're trying to keep me safe. I like to talk to kids about their emotions as other people. So Mr. Worry is doing a very good thing. He wants to keep you alive. Best way he can keep you alive is letting you go to sleep right now. So tomorrow we can investigate that question more thoroughly. Now we're going to sleep, right? But again, if you're not ordering up the chemicals in the morning, the kid's not going to be able to fall asleep at night. If we're watching something scary, or even mildly scary in the afternoon, we're not going to be able to fall asleep at night. And sometimes simply saying that to a child, like, I'd love to let you watch that movie, but you know what happens when you do. I just recently had this conversation with a 5th grader. A lot of the kids in her class are watching Stranger Things. I have this rule: if it's written by Stephen King, it is not for children. So I don't even know how 5th graders are watching it. But she's like, but I feel so left out. And I said, yeah, so you have a choice. You can like feel left out and be like, you know what? I choose not to watch this. I choose to, fill my head with more positive thoughts, right? And be confident about that. Or you can watch it and then not sleep at night. Like, those are basically your choices. Now you have to pick. Right? Because I like giving kids autonomy to a certain extent. Like, if you're going to pick sort of being bullied by your peers into watching this movie that's way too scary for you, watching this TV show that's way too scary for you, that's the choice you're making. But yeah, then you're not going to be able to sleep, then you're not going to control your anxieties. There's going to be a cascade of effects about that. You're not going to get, if you have the kind of brain that is like awake worrying about Stranger Things, you're never going to get used to it. You're just not the kind of person who can watch horror movies, which is great. I mean, that there's nothing wrong with you. You're just not the type of person who can do that. Know your own brain, know your profile, know what you're like. Because if that's what you're like, then don't watch the horror movies, right? Like, that's just not a smart thing to do.
What you're highlighting is the power of routine, and basically the comfort piece of kind of knowing, dismantling the worry before the worry.
Right.
But I know this thing that happens with parents is something works, and so it would be tomorrow. I am ready. I'm like Piscean about this. Here we go. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to get ready for tomorrow evening. I'm going to start to instill everything you say. And it's going to go great because, like you said, it's exactly what you need to do. I called the doctor, and here you are. Right. So then I'll do again the next day, and then Friday night will come around, and it won't be quite the same. And then suddenly that whole routine will just kind of falter, and and ultimately that's on me as the parent. So it's so there's
nature, by the way.
Go ahead, sorry.
Right? It's human nature that a slip becomes a slide, right? It's very normal. And I think that has to be built into the system, that let's say the weekend is going to be a little bit more, fluid or whatever. So it's built into the system that we go to bed later on the weekend, we wake up later in the morning on the weekend, because I think it's unrealistic. I know there's a lot of sleep research that suggests that you should keep to your routine even on the weekend. I don't think that's always realistic in modern life. Kids have performances, there are family parties, there are things that happen, right? Where why should the kid not have that experience? It's maybe for that very, very super organized type A personality, who has that same type of child, maybe that will work. But for most kids, it's just not fair. So it makes more sense to say, hey, the weekend's going to be like this, but come Sunday night, we're going right back into our pattern, so to speak. Okay, so Sunday night, even if you put it into your phone, okay, Sunday night we organize the routine again. Let's recommit again, right? We have our weekend routine, we have our week routine. Totally fine to do that, right? And then it's built into the system that it's going to be like that, right? So the parent doesn't feel like, oh, every weekend I mess it up. Oh my gosh, what's going to be? We are fairly resilient creatures, right? Our brains can learn 5 days it's like this and 2 days it's like that. It's fine. Again, it goes back to parental self-doubt. You didn't mess anything up. It just, for a moment, didn't work out. And that's okay. Holidays happen, there's a family wedding, a baby's born. I mean, things happen in life, and we have to be able to sort of roll with the punches and then remember that, okay, now we're going back to, we're recommitting again. Right? And there's nothing wrong with recommitting again every Monday morning.
it's okay to slip, but not to slide.
Right, exactly.
And we take breaks when we give them a little bit of a break themselves, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, my kids have picked up on that. I almost feel like, they realize, hey, Fridays and Saturdays are like, kind of off that during the week schedule. But again, like you said, it's important to drive home. Yes, those 2 days, but not the rest of the 5. Now that we've, you've stayed up and watched shows till 11 o'clock at night, on a Friday night. But that's, let's get back to it, Sunday night for Monday morning.
Right. And knowing that Sunday night, yeah, party's over. All good things must come to an end. Summer vacation comes to an end. Weekends come to an end. It is what it is. We recommit. And also, I think it's a message to send kids, right? That leisure time, breaks, treats are much more fun when they're special, when they're breaks, when they're treats. I had this conversation actually with, I was doing a parenting class once of moms of kids who had recovered from severe illnesses. And a lot of them were saying how when their kids were very, very sick, they ended up getting a lot of treats, right? A lot of stuff, a lot of exciting things. Everyone feels bad for the kids on the cancer ward in the hospital. And now that they're reorienting themselves back into life, things aren't exciting. What normally would be a treat for them was just they got used to it. And it's hard to now have things that are motivating to them, or even have them enjoy a treat because it's a treat, just get excited about something because they almost got jaded from getting too much, which is a great thing to tell parents. Also, the biggest gift a parent can give her kid, because I say this to mothers a lot, because mothers seem to have a harder time with this than fathers sometimes, is that word no, right? That no, we're not going to eat ice cream for breakfast on a Tuesday morning, but ice cream for breakfast on, a Saturday morning is a great plan, because that's like a Saturday treat. But Tuesday morning, sugar is not the smartest breakfast before school. So yeah, we're not having ice cream for breakfast. But if you're in that kind of house where everyone can eat what they want and whatever, then nothing's fun, nothing's a treat, nothing's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So how can parents find out more about what you're doing and about your targeted parenting classes and all those good things you have going on?
So I'm in a couple of places. I have a website, targetedparenting.com, where they can see clips of classes, and there's a blog with a lot of articles I've written over the year for the print media. And then there is also, I am on Instagram at Dr. Koslowitz Psychology, where it's at Dr.Koslowitz Psychology because the other one was taken. And where I basically do a free parenting class every Thursday night at 9 Eastern Standard Time, and I talk about a topic of the week and having to do with parenting or anxiety or psychotherapy or any of those things. Like last week we did self-confidence and how to have self-confidence if you're naturally a shy person. I am naturally a shy person, and I was recently at a networking event. I was just explaining sort of how I did it. And then weeks before we talked about anxiety, we've talked about moodiness, we've talked about ADHD, and we just talk about those different topics. I think tonight we're talking about putting your kids in therapy and whether or not that takes away from a sense of personal responsibility. So we're going to have that conversation. And then I also do a Psychology Today blog. I update it weekly. It's called Targeted Parenting, and where I either highlight an interesting research study and its implications for parenting, and sort of with some takeaways of so therefore let's do this, this, and this. I have a whole bunch of them on sleep and on how to help your kids sleep and all sorts of things like that. And then I'll also do sometimes some vignettes from child psychotherapy and implications for parenting. Just recently I've been writing about coronavirus and how it gives people insight into a day in the life of a child with OCD. This is what it feels like to have OCD. Now you have insight. Now you know, right? You're noticing every person sneezing anywhere near you in a meeting, right? This is what your child goes through every single day. So I want parents to understand child development from what we see in a psychotherapy office, or from what I hear teaching a parenting class, the common questions parents ask, and everything like that, so that the wider public can read about it and understand it. My passion is making psychotherapy and psychology research accessible to parents so that it's actionable and they could be oh, I'm going to do this. One of my tips about sleep that I actually learned from a research study that really has been working in my house is this idea of taking a really a hot bath. Like I said, we pair scents, so I do a hot bath with a lavender or a chamomile scent every night, and then a tepid shower, because there's something about there's something about calming chemicals that are triggered when your brain goes from very warm to cool that puts people to sleep. And I find I have a couple of kids who are like by nature very energetic and they're always on the go and they have tons of energy, and at night that's even worse. And this really works for them. It really puts them to sleep. Like the hot bath, the cool shower, not cold, we're not torturing people, but like a cool tepid shower. It just relaxes. You can even see the change in their body, where I have one kid, he's just a bundle of energy and he's like, oh, I'm calm. And like you see he's just like already ready to like relax and like lay down and like drift off to sleep. I saw at the toy fair a really nice toy. It's not out yet, but it's a therapy dog, and it has like a lavender scented insert that you can put into the microwave, and it was made out of a really good like soft plush that felt like very like therapeutic. And basically you microwave the insert and then you put the dog, this like therapy puppy, on the kid's feet, because warming your feet slightly at night helps you fall asleep. And again, so it's that idea, the calming scent, the warmth, and that like sense of like, oh, I have this puppy in my bed and he's going to keep me safe all night. You know, it's another calming routine, whether we really believe the puppy's going to keep us safe all night or not. It's another calming routine, because our brains are so easily influenced by patterns. So if we have that same calming routine, I read you these 2 books, and you know, we take the hot bath, we take the cool shower, the same scent every night, we get into bed. It's like, oh, my brain knows, okay, bedtime now. And it's much easier to hack our brain's patterns than we think. It's really a matter of looking at the data and then hacking whatever we see. Right? Like you want to, you know, if you want to philosophize with me 9 o'clock at night, let's just shift it to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We can have that same conversation 6 hours earlier, right? Sure. Like it's just hacking it.
Well, you are an absolute wealth of knowledge.
Yes, that was took the words out of my mouth. So
I always say I'm a child psychologist and I'm a mom of children, so I have that like built-in focus group in my house of a lot of kids. Plus, we live in a neighborhood with a lot of families, so, and my house seems to be the happening place to be. So we have a lot of there's a lot of children around all the time, but it helps because it's very easy for adults to forget. Just recently, I was doing a workshop in a 3rd grade classroom, and I was asking the kids about big problems versus little problems. And some of the things that the kids were saying were big problems. I was thinking, you know, I wonder if adults realize, like, wow, if you're in 3rd grade, that's a really big problem. You know, like when you're a little kid, that's a huge problem. And like when you're an adult, you're like, oh, big deal. The costume I wanted, you know, I wanted to dress up as this costume, and they were out of it in the store, and I couldn't, and that was the only thing I wanted to be. And then I went home without a costume, and now I don't have and I was sitting there thinking like, wow, you know, yeah, when you're in 3rd grade, that's a very big problem. You know, like it's not a little problem. We parents think it's a little problem, but like, no, it's a huge problem. My best friend doesn't want to sit with me at lunch. It's a huge problem when you're a 3rd grader.
Right,
Sure.
right.
Yeah, no, it's something that it's hard to remind yourself to keep that in mind, you know, when you're dealing with your own children.
For sure.
You know, I find that it's like, yeah, you just, what seems minimal and small to me is probably very large in their world. So.
Right.
Well, wow, go ahead.
Right, and getting into their brain by saying that to them, right? And like being like, I really get that, like, oh, right. I find myself whenever I'm trying to like, sort of get compliance out of my kids and it's not happening, if I reset myself and I say, okay, what's the barrier here? Like, why is this a problem? Like, help me see this through your eyes. Everything just melts, all the problems melt away. Like, so why aren't we moving forward? What's going on here really? They'll tell you, like they usually know, and they usually can explain what's going on. Then we can usually troubleshoot it. You know, it's not our job as parents to control our kids. It's our job to teach our kids how to control themselves. And I feel like sometimes when we get into that thing of like, I have to control this kid, get him into bed, get him to school, wait a minute, I need to teach him to get himself to bed. I need to teach him how to get himself to school, right? We forget that because we're so task oriented, because we're the adults, and like we know like the bus is coming, you know, the homework's got to get done, the dinner's got to get eaten, you know, like these things must happen. And we're right, because we're adults and we get the implications. Like if we never go to school, that's a problem, right? If every day we miss the bus, that's a problem. But for the kid, it's like, what's going on in your brain that's stopping you from doing what you know you should be doing right now? It's so helpful when we think that way. I find like every time I get stuck, going back to but why is so helpful.
Wow.
Fantastic. All right, that works great. Sounds like we got some more stuff to talk about maybe down the road.
Yeah, I'm already thinking of a couple more episodes we can schedule with you.
So we're gonna follow this up with some notes about sleep And I know you have some fantastic articles and blogs, and I know our parents would definitely benefit from those as well.
Yeah, so like we always say, definitely going to try and, we'll definitely share everything, you've referenced in the show notes. And then we always get our folks, companion document to this episode. So that'll be coming as well. And Dr. Robyn, thank you very much. This was great. And you definitely gave us a lot of actionable items and things that parents can work on with their own kids.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you.